Kids spend hours in bathroom. Mom opens door and catches them in the act. Laura knew that something was wrong. She usually had her hands full managing the house and the two little kids. When the house suddenly went quiet, she noticed it. At first she thought they were just playing, but now she wasn't too sure. Melanie and Justin had been in the bathroom for hours. What were they getting up to? But when she eventually decided to open the door, she couldn't believe her eyes. Nothing would ever be the same again. It was no secret that something weird had been going on inside their home. For the last few weeks, something just didn't seem right. But that night, all Laura wanted was to enjoy a relaxing night at home. She didn't think much of the kids' absence when she first noticed it, but eventually hours had passed and she hadn't heard so much as a peep from them. The realization sent a chill down Laura's spine. As a mother of two very active children, she knew that silence was a bad sign. She turned to her husband William, a deep frown setting between her eyebrows. "Honey, do you think the kids are all right?" she questioned, but as soon as her husband's face went pale, they shot up from the couch. William looked like he'd just seen a ghost. He was so invested in the TV show they were watching that he completely forgot that Melanie and Justin had disappeared into the hallway bathroom hours ago. The concerned parents rushed to the bathroom, desperate to ensure their children were okay. Laura knocked on the bathroom door, but there was no response. "Melanie, honey? Justin?" Laura called through the door. William called at the same time, but there was still no answer. Laura and William turned to one another, worry burning behind their eyes. Laura tried to open the door, but her heart sank when she found it locked. "What are we supposed to do?" she asked, tears welling in her eyes. William couldn't stand seeing his wife so afraid. He knocked on the door once again, shouting the children's names. At first there was no response, but after a second, William heard the faintest sound of their daughter's voice. He tried to hear what she had said, but her voice was muffled. "We gotta get this door open," he told his wife. His mind was spinning with 1,000 thoughts a second. In his panicked state, he could only think of one reasonable way to get the door open. "Stand back, honey," he instructed his wife. As soon as she moved out of the way, he slammed his entire body weight into the door, trying desperately to open it. It took a few attempts, but William was desperate to get to his children. He could only imagine what he'd walk in on. But the second the door swung open, his heart dropped. It was worse than he'd ever imagined. William and Laura Webb had their differences, but one thing the couple had in common was their dream to become parents. When they began dating just out of college, they shared this dream. They lived in Reading, Pennsylvania, and they thought the city was the perfect place to raise a family. The day William proposed to Laura was one of the best days of her life. She always dreamt of marrying a family man who could put her and their kids above anything else. She knew William was the man she'd been dreaming of for all those years. After the wedding, the couple started trying for a baby immediately. It only took 2 months for Laura to get a positive pregnancy test. "We're gonna be parents!" they cheered as she embraced her husband. Finally, her life was moving in the right direction. The day she gave birth to their first child, a little girl named Melanie, it felt like everything finally made sense. She and William were meant to be parents. The first 2 years of their young daughter were nothing short of perfection. The little blonde-haired girl had stolen their hearts, and they never thought they could love another human being as much as they loved their daughter. But when Laura fell pregnant with their second child, a little boy, they discovered it was possible to love another person as much as they loved Melanie. When Melanie was only 3 years old, her mother gave birth to her little brother. His name was Justin, and he was the apple of his sister's eye. The two bonded instantly, which brought a smile to their parents' faces. As the older sister, Melanie felt it was her job to protect her little brother, and that was precisely what she did. As months turned into years, she was always by his side, helping him. Before Laura and William knew it, Melanie was 7 and Justin was 4. Having been a stay-at-home mom for the last 7 years, Laura finally decided it was time to get back to work. Melanie was already going to primary school every day, and Laura and William had discussed signing Justin up at a daycare near their home. Before Laura knew it, it was time for her little boy's first day at daycare. When little Justin woke up that morning, he was excited to finally go to school. Laura drove him that morning and everything seemed fine. When he got home that afternoon, he was all smiles. Little boy seemed to enjoy his first day at school. But the next morning, something unexpected happened. "Come on, honey, it's time to get ready for school," Laura said, opening the curtains in Justin's bedroom, but the little boy didn't respond. He remained still in his bed. "Justin, come on," she repeated, but he wouldn't move. He stared at his mother and held his stomach. "Mommy, I feel sick. Can I stay at home with you today?" he spoke in a soft voice. Laura raised an eyebrow. She'd also once been a child who didn't want to go to school. She could still remember all the times she faked an illness to stay home. She wasn't going to fall for it. "No, you were fine yesterday. Now get out of bed and get dressed. Dad made breakfast. We're leaving in an hour," Laura said, leaving his bedroom. If only she'd known what was going on. That morning, the little boy reluctantly got out of bed and began dressing for school. He frowned sadly, clenching his stomach as he walked into the kitchen. Laura and William assumed that it was all just an act. When Laura drove her son to school, he hardly said a word as he stared out of the window. His hands never left his stomach. The next day was the same story. "Mommy, I think Justin should stay home today. He told me he was sick last night," Melanie informed her mother, but Laura simply laughed and rolled her eyes. "Your brother's fine, he's just being a bit dramatic. Please tell him to get dressed," Laura instructed her daughter, ignoring the concerned frown on Melanie's face. This pattern continued for 2 whole weeks. Every morning when Laura tried to wake her son, he would complain about a stomachache. The boy began eating less during this time, but Laura was convinced everything was fine. "I think he's just taking his chances. You know how kids are," Laura told her husband, but she was starting to notice that her routine was stressing Melanie out. "Are you gonna take Justin to a doctor?" the little girl asked around the breakfast table one morning. Justin was sitting with the rest of his family, refusing to eat the eggs his father had cooked. "No, honey, everything will be all right," Laura said. She thought it was nothing to worry about, but she was wrong. The following Monday, the little boy was in tears when she tried to wake him for school. "It hurts, Mommy," Justin cried, but that morning Laura wasn't in the mood for a fight. "Okay, you can stay home this one time." She finally gave in and let the boy stay home from school. But that evening, something strange happened once everyone was home after a long day at school at work. It was just after dinner and Laura and William were watching a TV show in the living room. At this time, the parents noticed their children going into the bathroom together. Laura didn't think much of this. Often enough, the children would run a shallow bath and have rubber ducky races to pass the time, but after a few hours, Laura noticed the silence. It had been a few hours since the children had gone into the bathroom. The realization shook Laura to her very core. She turned to her husband, her eyes wide as she called his name. "Honey, do you think the kids are all right?" she questioned. But as soon as her husband's face went pale, they shot up from the couch. Together, they rushed to the bathroom, their hearts racing, but when they tried to open the bathroom door, they were surprised to find it locked. "Open up!" Laura shouted, but there was no response. "Stand back, honey," William instructed his wife. As soon as she moved out of the way, he slammed his entire body weight into the door, trying desperately to open it. William tried again and again. He'd never been that scared before. The last thing he wanted was for anyone to get hurt. It took a few attempts, but William was desperate to get to his children. He could only imagine what he'd walk in on. But the second the door swung open, his heart dropped. It was worse than he ever could have imagined. As soon as William managed to get the door open, he noticed his children. Little Justin was leaning over the toilet, his eyes shut as he breathed heavily. Melanie was right beside him, rubbing his back. "He's sick, he fell asleep, we shouldn't wake him," the little girl said. But as soon as Laura saw her son, she began screaming, "Call an ambulance!" While William gave the ambulance all the information, Laura sat with her son. He was in and out of consciousness as he clutched his stomach. "He was throwing up," Melanie told her mother. William soon returned. "An ambulance is on its way," he said, his face twisted in horror. All along, their son wasn't faking it. He was sicker than they ever could have imagined. Just minutes later, a knock sounded on the front door. The ambulance had arrived. Laura was a sobbing mess and she sat beside her son in the ambulance. William followed the ambulance in his car with Melanie in the back seat. As soon as they got to the hospital, their little boy was wheeled off for all kinds of tests with a doctor. It was the most challenging few hours of Laura and William's lives as they waited for the doctor to get back and tell them what was going on. Laura felt terrible. For weeks, her son had been telling her that he was sick and she wouldn't listen. What if the damage was irreversible? Her hands shook as sweat coated her face. She was terrified, but eventually the doctor approached. "Your son has severe food poisoning. He's dehydrated, but we're currently hydrating him. He'll have to stay here for a few nights, but is expected to recover fully. You got to him just in time. He'll be all right," the doctor said. Laura cried as she thanked the doctor. In the following days, she did everything she could to help her son, but in the end, he fully recovered. Once he was healthy, he couldn't wait to return to school.